We're going to take you on such an adventure today, you won't believe it. This, I should put some clamps on my feet so I could climb mountains and take you somewhere so you could see what the view would be, at least from the top of Marcy or somewhere. I told somebody I was coming here to interview my good friend Bob Heins, and they said, are you going to start it out on the top of a mountain? I said, only in your dreams. We're at the dental offices of Bob Heins at 75 Court Street in Plattsburgh. Robert, how are you?
I'm fine, Gordy. It's good to see you.
Great.
It's good to see Calvin.
At my age, it's good to see anybody, but yeah. I was trying to figure out, you told me your family came here in 55. I moved here in 61. And you and I can't have no clue as to when we might have met each other.
I don't know when we crossed paths. You know, with the football, with Ducky, and I'm sure in schools.
Football with Ducky many years ago. Yeah. What era was that now?
I know it's a long time because I went to the Peru award ceremony, and all the coaches I can remember playing football, and Ducky and I used to describe there. So this was back in the 70s. In the 70s, we were doing football. 70s and 80s.
Pushing 30 years ago.
Yeah.
It's great. So you've been here a long time. Where were you brought up? You said your family moved here in 55.
Actually, I started, Dad was a teacher in Darien, Connecticut. Dad and Mother both taught. World War II came along, and they went, the Army Air Corps actually put him through school. He went to medical school in New York. So I grew up in Connecticut, moved to Selfridge Air Force Base in Michigan, and was there for 3 years. And then when Dad got out of the service, we ended up in Texas and came up here in the end of my sophomore year from Texas, a little town in Decatur.
Why?
Well, it's a long story. Dad loved the trees. He loved the trees, and he flew up here in September, and it was beautiful. And he loved the area, and we've been here ever since. And it's interesting when you're in high school and you grow up here. And I said, I'll never come back here. And one thing led to another, and ended up dental school in the service. And my wife is from Texas. Was going to practice in North Carolina. The Air Force decided they wanted me in Vietnam. Went to Vietnam. My wife stayed here. Came back here, took Hollis Stevenson's practice over, and it's the greatest move I've ever made. I love it here.
You know, he drops that name, Hollis Stevenson, which I'm sure is unfamiliar with a huge segment of our audience. But I might mention that in his day, he was considered the dean of Plattsburgh dentistry, very much involved with the Morris Campground. Calvin, you've been up there many times, the Wesleyan Methodist Church. His kids, I've known Hollis Stevenson long before I ever even knew where Plattsburgh was because of the religious affiliation and my dad being a minister.
Did missionary work. He did missionary work in Africa. Hollis was all over.
His kids went to Houghton College, that school that my brother graduated from, and I made it almost 1 year before they said, gee, we wish you'd leave town. Don't even wave on your way out of town. But Hollis Stevenson was quite a guy, and he was the first dentist I ever went to when I first came to Plattsburgh. And
have loved it here ever since.
That's great. There's so many things to do, and I hate it when I go home, or when I did go home when my kids were younger and say, we're bored, there's nothing to do. And so we showed them all the things there are to do.
Oh, it's incredible. It's just, and then getting involved in the outdoors the way I have, when you're climbing in the Adirondacks here, and you meet people that drive all the way from New York City or Rochester or wherever, all over the east, to come climb here, and we're just an hour away. And
did you start your climbing here?
It's a funny story on starting to climb. When I was in Vietnam, my wife stayed with my parents, and my mother and dad both were 46ers, climbed the 46 peaks in the Adirondacks in their 50s. And so Evelyn climbed with them. And when I came back, Evelyn said, do you want to do some climbing? And I was all into tennis at that point. And I said, no. So we got into tennis and golf, and it was only maybe 4 years ago that I really got back in the climbing again, with Phil Carell and that crew that you know real well.
Good friend Philip from Saranac.
Is now the treasurer of the 46er organization. It took over Art Dittmar's position because of Art's ill health. But that started me in the Adirondacks, and then from there we just branched out and went all over the place.
Now we're not talking about just climbing a few small mountains like a day climb on Marcy. You've been on 3 pretty spectacular trips so far.
Well,
right?
It's been interesting. Yeah, I started on a trek in Nepal. I, like a lot of other people, read In the Thin Air by John Krakauer and had this thing where I wanted to see Mount Everest. And there turned out there was, on all these trips, there's always some kind of an adventure that takes place. Either you meet people or something happens, and in each one of them, something sort of bizarre happened. But on the trip to Nepal, there was a dental clinic, and we brought dental supplies. I went with John Prandecki, and you'll see some pictures of John and I in this clinic. And from Nepal, I did Mount Rainier with a group of dentists to raise money, actually, for Operation Smile, which is an organization that treats kids in third world countries for cleft palates and things. And the people at Plattsburgh, you articulate this all the time. I put a little ad in the paper that I was going to raise money, and couldn't believe the response I got. It was fantastic.
People are amazing.
I know, it was unbelievable. And that was Rainier, and that got me started. Then that's one of the mountains that really gives you an opportunity to find out what it's all about. And from there, we went to Aconcagua, which is a 23,000-foot peak in the Andes, the highest peak outside of Asia. And then Judge Lawless and I just finished Mount Elbrus, which is the tallest peak in Europe, this past July, and we're going again this coming August to do Kilimanjaro. See, and I don't know that I'll ever do this, but one of the things now is to climb the 7 summits, which is the highest peak in each continent.
Oh boy!
And well, the problem is you end up with Everest, and I just want to see that. But it keeps it keeps me young. It really does. It keeps me young, and I've just met a lot of people and had some interesting adventures.
Well, it's very neat. We've had the good fortune of interviewing many of the area's senior citizens, and a lot of them are in their 80s and 90s and are still tremendously vital and strong, and there's nothing wrong with trying to maintain that quality of life as long as you can, and you're a perfect example of that because you're more than 18. How old are you now? 60?
62, going on 63.
Going on 63 and still talking about climbing a few more before the end of the road.
It's kind of fun when you do that when most of the other climbers are in their 30s and 40s, and you want to stay up with them and you don't want to be holding anybody up, so it keeps you motivated and keeps you in shape, and that's part of it. I think a lot of it is the training before you go.
Yeah, you don't just get in the taxi.
No, you can't. Not on the big ones. You can't. No, you don't. It's a grind. The big mountains are a whole different challenge. It's you versus the mountain, and most of the time the mountain wins, but it's an experience.
It's great. We got so much to talk about. There are pictures all over this building. We got a slide presentation already. Just a few days ago, we had the good fortune of interviewing my good friend and former colleague in the media locally, Jack LeDuc, of his trip. He and Marina went to Peru and took some fabulous slides. You're going to see some wonderful pictures today. You're going to see some of the equipment behind us that you can use to climb a mountain if you choose to do that when we're finished today. All in all, I would say don't leave for very long or come back and watch this show when it's aired again. So nice that you allow us to share some of these experiences by showing us the photographs. Almost anywhere you turn your camera into places like these, you're going to get a good shot, aren't you, huh?
You really are. And I read a tour book going into Nepal, and it said you could actually be walking along fall, have your camera go up in the air, the shot would go off, and you'd get a picture. And in the Khimbu area in Nepal, which is the area where Mount Everest is, in eastern Nepal, it is like that, Gordy. I mean, it's incredible. This is a picture as and there's an interesting story here too, because when you fly into a place called Lukala, in this little airplane, that literally the airfield is built on a mountain. It's built on the side of a hill, and it's at about a 40-degree angle. And this plane circles in, comes around these mountains, and just almost crash lands into the runway, races up.
Makes me want to run right over there.
There's wrecks of old airplanes on the side of the mountain.
Oh, God.
And then in the afternoon it gets foggy, so there's all these little adventures. And when you take off and when you leave, you take off and hope that the plane takes off and gets airborne, or you're down in the valley.
Sure, we're going to go right away.
So anyway, you fly in here, and then you hike up into the area. It's about a 3 or 4 day climb to get to the Mount Everest base camp. but you have to acclimate, and we'll talk about that as we go, what acclimation really is in high mountaineering. But that's what it starts. You get off the airplane and you get this, and you're just 22, 23, 24,000 foot peaks just right off the airplane. It's just incredible, and it was beautiful. And part of this adventure was we didn't have a lot of time. John Prandecki and I were taking dental supplies actually into a dental clinic sponsored. Namche Bazaar is the Sherpa capital. It's halfway between Lukla, where you fly into, and Everest Base Camp. So all the Everest expeditions go through Namche, and they have a dental clinic there. And I talked to the American Himalaya Society in San Francisco, and it took a while, but we were able to get faxes and emails, and finally I asked, it's run by 2 Sherpa hygienists that were trained in Canada. And it's incredible what they do. I mean, they do amazing dentistry. So John and I brought about 75 pounds of dental supplies in, everything from 150 toothbrushes, 5,000 fluoride tablets, anesthetics, all this stuff that we carried. Well, the story was that you were going to be able to take a Russian helicopter into Lukla and not take a fixed-wing aircraft so we could have enough supplies. Well, as it turns out, the Russian helicopters weren't running. They would not let us carry all our supplies in. So we left our gear there and kept the dental supplies.
Did you really?
So
boy.
But what an experience. It was really, really incredible. And on the way up, and it's a trail. I mean, these people, once you get off the airplane, it's a trail. You walk. This is the way they carry. This is like 87. This is 87.
It's the main thoroughfare, huh?
That's the main affair. This gentleman is a porter. That carries basically your supplies, some of the poorest people in the world, literally.
He's a little guy.
He's about 4'10". Prandecki now played football at Colgate. He's big. I'm not very tall, but this guy came about to my shoulders. He's got over 200 pounds on his back.
Think about that.
And the cool thing there was we had all these clothes. We knew they were poor.
Nice T-shirt.
Yeah, you like that? That was incredible. The only thing that I could find that we still had, I had a Mayor's Cup T-shirt. I gave it to him, and he put it on. And I did later on in the climb, I bought a parka and gave it to him, and it was incredible to watch this guy. I mean, to get this parka. The only people on earth you can give American money to, they don't know what to do with it. They give it back to you as a tip. They didn't know how to handle it.
Not a clue, huh?
So we were able to go to the clinic. We worked there for a day. As it turned out, we were there longer because the weather was so bad. But this is a picture of actually Namche and the mountains around the village. The interesting thing with this village, they have been able, the British got them hydropower, so it's electrified. And there are lights, and the Sherpas pretty much stay there year-round. One thing that people should know about a Sherpa is not somebody that just necessarily runs up a mountain. It's a culture. It would be like the Navajo are to Indians. I mean, Sherpa actually means from the east. They came from Tibet and have settled in this area of Nepal. Wonderful people, just really very, very friendly people. And that was part of the fun on these trips, meeting kids and people from all over. And then these are just some of the peaks that you'll see at different times of the day. This happens to be sunrise, and this is right before a rainstorm. And the joke is, this is when we got into Namche, which is about 13,000 feet. You had to stay there for a day. They wanted you to acclimate. They wanted you to stay. This is our guide service. From 13,000 feet up, they don't want you to go a vertical of about 1,000 feet, 1,500 feet a day, so that you wouldn't have acute altitude sickness. So we were there, and look how beautiful it is. And my whole goal was now to get up and get pictures of Mount Everest, which is right around the corner. And we decided, actually John Prandecki, I have to say, we had a beer. We sat out here and looked at this lovely, had a beer, said we get up in the morning, and then the clouds came in, and for 4 days you couldn't see anything. So the only picture that I have of Everest is, unfortunately, from an airplane. So we're going to go back. I'm going to go back next year and climb one of the 20,000 footers, go back to the clinic, and try and work there for a few days. But this is how they get there. Above 10,000 feet, yaks basically are the beast of burden for the Everest expeditions and for commerce. They actually have yak trains that go to China. And when you're on the trail, it's interesting. They always say stay on the mountainside of the yak. In other words, you don't want to be, and there's a picture over here that I'll show you in a second where when the yaks come by, you want to make sure you're on the mountain, not on the outside of the trail, because people do get knocked over.
I can't understand that.
People do get hammered. And
if I ever go there, that's the first thing I'm going to remember, Calvin. Stay on the mountainside of the yak.
I've always heard they were very rude.
Well, you know, that could become a byword in my life now. Stay on the mountainside of the yak. I'm going to tell that to people who are down and out.
Well, I'll show you over here. This is
all right. Wherever you take us,
this is
we'll
Avi
go.
de Blanc. This peak. I didn't take this mountain. This peak is back here, and it's about 3 days to get to Nuptse and Lhotse and Everest. But it shows you the trail, and I just took this picture to show you the steps, and there's a drop off here. So when the yaks come by, you want to stay here. The yak actually knows his own weight, but body size, but they put all these packs on him, and they don't.
How wide is that?
How wide is that? That's probably here to here. I mean, you just have enough room to get by the yak to get by you.
Show me again. I wasn't looking.
Well, it's about that wide. So there's if you're like this,
About 5 feet.
yeah.
And let me see
And
that.
Prandeki-
That yak looked about 4 feet. So now you know why I'm not going there.
I kidded John Prandeki. He was in all kinds of great shape. The only thing he didn't like, you had to cross. I don't have a picture. You had to cross these bridges to get across. They were swinging bridges to get across these rivers. Well, and on a few of them there were a few empty spaces there.
Oh, good.
And
I hope my wife watches
it would
this.
drive. I'd get him out there and I start shaking the bridge,
sure
and
you
John was berserk, especially when the yaks came across, because then you had to really move. But
Jack LeDuc was showing us some of those little bridges that went gradually up into the canopy in Peru, into the top of the forest, 100 and who knows how many feet up, gradually. But they were mesh on both sides with a tiny framework and boards that were about this wide on the bottom. And his wife went up there. And I said, my wife would be down saying, have a good trip. I'll see you when you come back.
Well, it does get your attention, especially when you're stepping, making sure you know.
Oh,
well, I think we might have been maybe 75 feet above the water.
Just enough.
Just enough to get you.
Just enough to be a thrill. Oh, gosh.
That pretty much is Nepal. The only sad thing about Nepal was, and I say every one of these is an adventure. Our Sherpa, our guide, to leave when we were going to go, the weather got bad, and that's a whole other story. But we were supposed to be, if we couldn't get out commercially, they were going to pick us up in an aircraft, and we're sitting in Lukla in the fog, and I heard this plane go over. And every time I hear a plane like that, I go, it's Amelia Earhart. It turned out it was the Sherpa's cousin, the pilot, and went right into a mountain,
Into the
18,000 feet,
Oh.
boom, and they went up, and that was.
Oh.
So there's always some crazy thing that happens. That was extremely, that was just a tragedy, and it shook everybody up.
That's unbelievable. Let's look at some of this equipment over here. I think this is kind of cool. This caught my eye because it's like nothing I had ever seen before.
This is a high mountaineering plastic boot, which
Look how sharp those things are.
these aren't as sharp as you can get them. And these are crampons. They're step-ins that you wear. These are great boots. They're fairly heavy. They look like ski boots,
Yeah.
but they're extremely comfortable. They're very stiff. And these are step-ins, meaning you can just, well, I don't know if you want me to take it apart, but
you
you
don't
take it
have to,
apart. It clips in,
Yeah.
and you're in it. And it's just what you wear on ice. It becomes your friend, and you learn to trust these. And it takes a while. But we use these in the Adirondacks some. But that on the glaciers, Rainier and whatever, and that's just a standard set of crampons.
Unbelievable.
It's kind of fun. This is just your handy little ice axe that you do on most of the expeditions. You have ice axe or ski poles that you carry with you. You clip this into your harness in your carabiner here, and use that for a lot of things. Self-arresting, digging for water when you're in a glacier. But it's basically self-arrest. This is called your tool. You never want to lose this. You want to keep it with you, so you clip it on you. And you learn the different self-arrest positions on what you do if you fall, and especially if you're roped together. I mean, if you're roped together and somebody behind you falls, if he doesn't holler and you don't get into a self-arrest position, the whole crew could go. So you learn how to do that. That's part of the training.
I know you started climbing here in the Adirondacks, but did you have a teacher? Did you learn by just going with guys who knew how to do it? What's the learning process?
Well, some of this, in the Adirondacks, it was Phil Carell. I mean, just the first time, Gordy, I'll tell you a funny story. I didn't know how to put crampons on. I had crampons. We went out to climb Macomb. It was 30 below zero. I mean, in the Adirondacks in the winter, it can be as cold as it can be anywhere.
Sure.
30 below zero, I had these crampons in a box. I had never taken them out of the box. They're climbing with these guys. They all take off. I take the box out. I didn't know how to put the crampons on, and there was a learning experience. I learned at that point how to do it. But no, there are schools that you go to. In Rainier, when you climb Mount Rainier, you have to take a course for a day and a half, 2 days, to understand how to get roped up, how to tie knots, which I'm still not very good at, how to do crevasse work, what you do if you fall in a crevasse, and the other thing that Tim Lawless and I did before we went to, and you'll see a couple of slides of this, before we went to Elbrus, Ed Palin, who has Rock and River Guide Service in Keene, who has been all over the world climbing. I mean, he's been some of the big 8,000 meter peaks. We just took a course with him just to get a self-refresher on what you do with self-arrest, what you do if you're in a crevasse, how to get out of a crevasse, and that type of thing. So it's a learning procedure, and you just have to you make yourself go back and do it again when you're on a big mountain.
Define self-arrest. Good.
Oh, that's right, too. I know what it means.
Well, self-arrest means if you're on a glacier and you're on an ice field and you fall, you have to be able to stop, because it's like going down a hill. I mean, you're just going to take off. You can't use your crampons, in that if you stuck your crampons, you're going to break your ankle or whatever. So as you're sliding, you have to literally take this tool and, I don't want to get into the floor, but they teach you how to bury this axe into the snow and then kick your crampons in. And if you can stop yourself, you're all set. The self-arresting scenario with a rope team is different, in that if somebody falls, you get into the position, because you got about 50 feet of rope, so you got that much time as he's sliding to get yourself in a position to try and hold him and then hold you so you don't go down. And if you don't go, there's usually about 4 or 5 in a rope team, so you got 4 or 5 chances to keep from heading downward.
Well, this is all marvelous and great adventure, but there is danger.
Oh yeah.
I mean, things like staying on the mountainside of the Yak. I'm going to turn that into a North Country household phrase, but there are things you have to know, because it's too late to know it after.
No, that's true.
Fact.
That's true. And you're going to see right here when we go around the corner that Aconcagua, the peak in South America, I came down with pulmonary edema. I mean, I'm lucky I'm still here on that one. Yeah, that got to be a whole nother adventure that you'll see based on weather. That's something we haven't talked about. But when you're on these big mountains, you're at the mercy of what the good Lord's going to throw at you. And the weather on Aconcagua, before I left, I was told that there's going to be some of the worst, if the storms come, you'll have some of the worst weather anywhere in the world. And we got into a situation where we had winds at 90 miles an hour, and tents were blowing away. And you're laying in this tent as the tent's bouncing around and at 20,000 feet, wondering, what in the world am I doing here?
Wow.
So, I mean, it's cold. People got frostbite, and you can die. I was fortunate on Aconcagua to realize what the important things in life were, and you wanted to get down and not get summit driven.
You do have time for reflection.
Yeah, you do. You sure do.
Well, pulmonary edema can be pretty serious stuff. How did you make it through that little season?
Well, I knew what was coming, and just in that situation, you have to turn around and go down. We had run out of water. That's another whole story we'll talk about. That was in the Thin Air 3, what happened to us on that mountain. And I've got a few slides that I'll show you.
I think we're really convincing people to start
you'll
this.
see, you'll see how beat up you look. I lost 18 pounds on that one.
Did you really?
And this is
move along.
This is Aconcagua, the east face of Aconcagua. It's in Argentina, right on the Chilean border, not far from Mendoza, 90 miles from the Pacific. And the 90 miles from the Pacific means that it really creates its own weather. The winds come and it looks nice and peaceful here, but it can certainly change, and it changes in a hurry. I got a couple of slides that'll show you how fast the weather can change. And I got within 400 feet of the summit, of the south summit. I got to the north summit. 400 feet of the summit, and had to turn around.
Oh my! Disappointing.
But it was, but it wasn't. I mean, I realized in my life that it was my wife and kids, and I was funny. I kept telling myself, I said, I'm not going to die on a mountain nobody in Plattsburgh can pronounce, because when you say Aconcagua, I couldn't pronounce it before I was there, and it was an adventure.
And you're going to do another one after all these stories? All right, let's go in the other room and check some more. Calvin and I have visited a lot of beautiful buildings, forts, and great old stone edifices, and since we've been doing this program, this is a wonderful building. I'm just looking down here at the remnants of a bricked-up fireplace. The interior of this building, you told me, dates back 192 years.
In the other room, I'll show you. This is 1850. That's actually black marble that was painted. But in the other room, it's 1810.
So this building was around, for those of you who are now getting psyched about celebrating the history of the Battle of Plattsburgh. This had been here for 4 years when the Battle of Plattsburgh was fought.
In fact,
in the War of 1812.
When they were digging, Kit Booth and the boys were digging in the back for the addition, I kept saying, maybe you could see if there's any artifact or anything. But we didn't find. We found some old pipes and things, but didn't find any cannonballs or
nothing neat in the attic here or anything?
The attic was interesting. Yeah, we found some old. They actually were charcoals that were done of some old people, and I can't remember, Evelyn knows, but they lived down the street, some of the grandkids, and somehow we were able to track them down through names and gave them the pictures. It was pretty incredible.
You gotta be kidding.
Old books from 1815 and whatever, so it's pretty amazing.
Oh, that's
pretty amazing.
And so this building has quite a history. You were telling me before the camera started some of the things that happened here. Doctor's offices?
Yeah, it was a doctor's office. An ophthalmologist was here in some people still remember that, back in the 30s. Dr. Delbell was here, actually.
Oh, wow,
this was Nello Delbell's living room we're standing in. But then it goes back in time, and I think it was Alan Everest that wrote the book that talks about having readings in this room. They'd come in here and read back in the late 1890s and things, before TV and radio, I guess. Yeah. They'd have readings, and so that's what's neat. I mean, you live in history, and we take it for granted. We really do sometimes. I think
sometimes you just have to look around. Like, I'm sure some people would come in this room and get their teeth fixed and never know that used to be
look at me and go, oh no. That's a picture of Rainier. That's Rainier's in Washington State. It's an incredible mountain in that it really is by itself. It doesn't sit in a range like the Alps or the Andes or the Himalayas. It's by itself. And if you're in Seattle, and I know you said you flew over it. I didn't see it till it was foggy, and then right before we went there, in Seattle, 90 miles away, I saw this monster mountain in the distance, and it's quite a sight. And you get about everything you want on Rainier. We had avalanches and crevasses, and it was a real adventure.
Yeah, a lot of the things you've mentioned I can understand would be adventures for armchair adventurers like myself, but avalanche is pretty serious stuff.
I think, Gordy, that's probably the thing that scares you the most, and that actually has probably killed more mountaineers. Big Anatoly Bolkarev, who was involved in in the climb with Krakauer in the thin air, Alex Lowe. A lot of the big mountaineers have been killed by avalanches. It's
so hard to predict.
It's a devastating thing. I just saw one from a distance. You actually hear it before you see it, and it's just scary.
We correspond all the time with friends who live in Alaska, and there are certain roads that go past the mountains that are avalanche prone in the wintertime, and every year people get killed in avalanches. You see them just take a big D9 Caterpillar bulldozer and just flip it right onto its side, you know. This is a nice shot.
That's a shot I took. I actually, not far out of Lukula, Kachunga is the name of the mountain. I think I'm probably not pronouncing it correctly, but it's 22,000 feet. But it was kind of neat because you can see the snow cornices on top and some of the things flying off the side. I think it's Brashear, David Brashear. They tried to free climb this thing and
Come on.
had a problem. Yeah, the alpine style. When you alpine style climb, you don't. You just go. There's 2 or 3 of you, and you just sleep. You sleep on the side of the mountain in these hammocks, and
I don't think so.
it was pretty incredible. And they ran out of water, and we're lucky they came back.
Oh, my. That's
I just looked at that one. It's
beautiful, beautiful shot. So is this the old part of the house?
Look
at the size
of the wall.
of
See
the
that
wall.
Yeah.
Wow, isn't that
It
incredible?
was a single room. I'm sure they added, and that was the fireplace.
Another fire. I wonder if that dates back to the beginning.
I'm
Probably
not
a long
sure.
ways.
Yeah, that goes back quite a ways. The other way you can tell is out in the basement. You can see the different sizes of the brick. I mean, it's
Oh, you
insulated with 2 or 3 layers of brick, and they had one layer, then an inside layer, and I guess the airspace help insulate the house. But that's the original hearth. I mean, not hearth. What do you call it that goes out?
Yeah, I know. But that's there, huh?
Yeah. So,
Threshold? Is that a threshold? I don't know what you call
maybe
it.
that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll call it a threshold.
My wife would know, and she'd be upset that I didn't say
All right, just walk right over here and show us what
Well,
we've
these are
got.
some- you can look at this and say, where in the world is this taken? And this is taken right in the Adirondacks. This is Haystack. In a
kidding.
storm. This is Marcy behind us. But this is some of my climbing crew. This is Phil Carell, Sharpie Swan. Jimmy Kovacs, a teacher in Peru. Phil was, for years, was a wrestling coach in Saranac. Sharpie is a contractor, I think, and they're teaching me the lay of the land. But I don't care whether you climb 25,000 feet, whatever. It's just to get out and enjoy the Adirondacks. And that's what I tell people. It's a beautiful, beautiful area to climb in. And this is just the summit. I finished my winter 46 this past winter in February, and this is we're on Mount Colden, and that
was a cold day, I can
It was
tell.
4 below. Yeah, it was 4 below on top. But what a beautiful day! I mean, it was crystal clear. You could see all over. It was just gorgeous, and it was neat because 2 of the dentists that I climb with around the world came and really appreciated the Adirondacks. I don't think they really. Dawn is from Vegas and Frank is from Cleveland. I mean, you hear about the Adirondacks, but you don't realize until you're here really how pretty they can be. And then we just have some. This is a picture that you'll probably see later in a slide. This is on top of Elbrus, the slide, the Mountain Timian, and I did this past August in Russia. This is actually Lupa, who's a very famous Russian woman climber. And that's kind of sad in a way. With the Soviet Union's collapse, back in the early 90s, the Russians were the premier climbers in the Himalayas. And with the collapse of the government, they really didn't, the climbing schools all folded. And you'll find some of the most famous Russian climbers now just guiding Americans just for money.
Isn't that amazing?
But she was amazing. She's in her 50s. And I mean, she could have run up the mountain, I think. It was kind of fun. And I'll talk about that when we get into the Elbrus pictures, because there's a guy sitting in the snow, and I thought maybe he was taking pictures of the Russians. And as it turned out, he left. 2 days later, he came to the hotel. He had these pictures. So he had actually gone up the mountain, taken pictures, ran back down, got the pictures developed, and selling us the pictures. This guy was in pretty good shape. So
That's amazing.
So and this just happens to be the summit of Rainier. I know it's probably too small to see, but that was our dental group. Those are all dentists. There were, I think, 15 of us out of 30 summited that. We raised $80,000 for Operation Smile. It was just great. Someday, when Craig comes back, I hope to be able to do that and get out into the third world countries and do some cleft palate work.
Yeah, you mentioned that your son is going to come back to practice.
He's going to come back in July. I'm looking forward to it. It really was fun. He was here last week, and just doing some dentistry together was neat.
That's really neat.
This is a picture really that makes it all worthwhile. This is the summit of Elbrus with two of the friends that I climb all over the world with. This is Dawn McClellan, she's a pediatric dentist in Las Vegas, and Frank Radis, who's a pediatric dentist in Cleveland. And this gentleman is Luis Benz, who's a guide for Alpine Ascents, who was one of the lead guides in Eric Weinmeier's The Blind Gentleman's Climb up Mount Everest. What a nice guy. He's a 30-year-old that climbs all over the world. What a very articulate. It's the kind of thing, Gordy, that maybe it was like in the old days in the Civil War. You'd follow him anywhere. I mean, he'd tell you to go, and he was so well prepared that you'd go. And that was a great experience. And we shared a lot of stories and got to know a lot of people.
That's wonderful. Good shots.
This is Tim. There's Tim and Dawn and myself and my son and Frank before we finished Colden on the Adirondacks at Marcy Dam.
Is it?
It's a picture of Marcy
Dam.
Oh, yeah.
It's a good place to start for people.
It is. It really is. It's a nice little walk. Or before you go there, you might want to do Mount Joe and look at Heart Lake. But Marcy Dam is a nice little. It's not a difficult walk. In fact, my mother's in a wheelchair now. They got her in the wheelchair up the fire road. She wanted to do. And she did this. They got her to Marcy Dam in a wheelchair.
That's really great. Cool. Oh, that's wonderful.
So that's part of the pictures.
Those are great. All good shots. Everybody looks happy.
Everybody's having fun.
No sore muscles.
That's later. You don't show all that.
You don't?
We don't want to show everything.
All right. What's next?
Well, we can come back out and I can go through some slides with you if you'd like,
right.
And we can show you some adventures and talk about a few of the climbs, and I'll show you some more pictures of some of the summits and whatever.
That's great. For those of you who just turned on your television sets, too bad. You missed a lot, but you'll get a chance to see it again, I hope. We're talking with Bob Heins, a local dentist whose association with me goes back a long time because he helped some of our broadcasters doing color for football games almost 30 years ago on the local radio station. We watched the guy for a long time and read about he and Tim Lawless climbing that last mountain, and we can't wait to see him do it again. We're going to look some slides in just a few minutes. All right, we got the first slide. What is it, Robert?
Well, it's the picture I have in the other room. That's Mount Rainier, and I thought I'd start just with about 4 or 5 slides of Rainier, just to give you an idea about crevasses and whatever. And from there, we'll go to Elbrus with Tim and I, and then I'll show you some Aconcagua pictures, and that should show you my worst.
Did you ever go to Mount St. Helens?
Saw Mount St. Helens. You can see Mount St. Helens from Rainier when we were in our training. That's pretty incredible. I saw the IMAX.
To fly over that. I've flown over it with that whole huge chunk right out of it.
The whole side blown away. Yeah, it's pretty impressive. And the crazy thing is, I mean, these are all active volcanoes. That's an active volcano, and someday, somewhere, that one will go. And when Rainier goes, Seattle's going to have a problem. I mean, it could be 2 jillion years from now, but that eventually will blow. So here we are on Rainier. I have a pointer, but I don't know. Maybe you don't need it. You get an idea. We go up the ice there, and there's crevasses. And the crazy thing is, we're going to start at the top and come down. But we're roped up, and there's a crew of us. This is the dental crew again, and I just want to show you the crevasse scenario. It's funny, when you climb at Rainier, they have you leave at midnight. So when you climb up, you don't see the crevasses so much.
Just as well.
You can see, you get an idea that there's a deep blue hole there somewhere. You got your headlamps on. But coming down, you get a chance to visualize just how deep they are. And the crevasses on Rainier, actually, some of them are actually deeper than the crevasses on Everest, based on the amount of snowfall that they have on Rainier. And it's pretty amazing. You cross these snow bridges, and you can see the snow bridge going across the crevasse, and you could be the 51st across, and the 52nd one, the bridge will collapse. So you want to make sure that you're roped and ready.
I'd be counting if that was every time. 50, 51.
Well, you hope that and they do put ladders up to some extent. But again, you see we're going down and we're crossing the crevasse fields. It gets your attention. And this shows you some of the crew coming down. You see how hot it is. I mean, it gets warm when the sun beating on the snow. But you can see the Surats. There's a good picture here you can see the side of those things, and they fall. Rainier's got, unfortunately, the most individual casualties in one climb. I think 11 climbers were killed with an RMI climb. The guide had the people stay in what he thought was a safe position to look for a safe route through the crevasse fields, and a whole wall like that just buried them. But that's Rainier. Now we quickly jump to Mount Elbrus. We just now traveled halfway around the world. That's Mount Elbrus in the Soviet Union. This is in the Caucasus Range, the climb that Tim and I took. That's the highest peak in Europe. It's a glacial. It's a volcano, inactive. It has twin peaks. The volcano blew the two peaks apart. It's about 1804. This is in July, only because I remember that because I left on our 40th wedding anniversary.
Oh, that's good.
My wife was really thrilled
good.
that was part of the deal. So what we'll do, somebody said, well, what do you do to stay in shape? Well, I put a 50-pound pack on my back, and with those climbing boots, which weigh about 7 pounds, and get on this little stair mill that they have at the Court Club and do that for 30 or 40 minutes every few days. And that really is the closest thing I could find to getting the idea what high mountaineering is, because it becomes you, and you're climbing a lot of these peaks at night, so you don't talk to people, you don't see a whole lot on your ascent. It's just you against the mountain, and it's you playing mind games with yourself. And I think climbing is probably, high mountaineering is about 60% mental. It really is 40% physical. I really think it gets to be a mental game, and I get where I'd learn poems, and I do, like Kipling's If you can keep your head in those about you, and you say those over and over. So that's the way I trained. And again, being older, it makes you train all year round. You really have to stay after it. And that on the left is Ed Palin, and on the right is Tim Lawless. It was last year, there was still some snow on Whiteface, and we went up one of the ski lifts, and we didn't go up the lift. We walked up, and I'll show you. That's sort of a self-arrest position, Calvin. You wondered what that was. That's Timmy with his ice axe in the snow, and he doesn't actually have crampons on there, but he would have his crampons dug in, just working on different techniques. And we got on to work on crevasse work. Ed got us rigged up to the ski pole and showed us how to prusak these are little things that you put on, little knots to crawl out of a crevasse. Ed had actually fallen in a couple of crevasses in his lifetime, and I asked him, he said, well, what if you get over the initial shock? And as long as you have somebody tied on, then it's just a matter of getting yourself out. And in these schools, they actually put you in a crevasse and make you get out. So it was a good experience. So that's where. And then, I mean, we can quickly run through this. We just landed in St. Petersburg.
Oh, that was wonderful.
That's a cathedral, and I should know the name of it, in St. Petersburg in
Look at the
Russia.
architecture. Look at the golden minarets. Isn't that incredible?
And Yeah, it was part of this trip was just the cultural exchange we had with the Russians, and this is interesting. And there's three dentists walking down the streets of St. Petersburg, and look what the sign is. It's a dental clinic. See the three teeth? So it's like T. You can dial T27757700008 and get a dentist, or you can get the three American dentists that are wandering around the street. So we saw that. We kind of had a picture of that, and the Soviet Union still has some problems. I mean, Moscow is just like is just like New York City. I mean, it's alive and vibrant. St. Petersburg does have some problems, and I just took that picture out the hotel window of a bus. Some people going to work, and I was thinking, boy, it's like going back in the 40s. Although there are cars, and it was my second trip there. But part of the experience was just loading all our gear. We took the night train from St. Petersburg to Moscow. And you should have seen this whole crew, 15 of us, with all this gear getting on a train, which was an experience, piling the train, and then this is a picture you're not supposed to take. They still don't want you taking pictures of their airports. Why, I'm not sure. I don't know what they're concerned about. That's all. And that's just our crew getting ready to head out. It's interesting the people you meet. I don't have my pointer, but the kid in the center, he's a 19-year-old. That's Captain Kangaroo's grandson, believe it or not. That's Brett Keeshan, who's a student in Middlebury. Yeah. The one in the yellow right here in front. The boy behind him in red actually is Eero. He's a Finnish. He's an American, but his father was big in the Finnish embassy. He's a base jumper. If you remember the Mountain Dew commercial, I don't know, where the kid was jumping out of the airplane with a skateboard on. Well, that was Eero. He jumps all over. He free base climbs, and he's jumped off of towers all over the world. And the interesting, the guy on the right was a bobsled driver. Actually, was on one of the American teams. He wants to do the 7 summits. He's going to head for Everest after our adventure. Also was a bull rider. So, I mean, you get a bizarre group of people.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah.
I did that for a
Did you
living
really?
for a while, yeah.
He was showing me some of how you rope yourself in. You could probably do that, how you rope yourself into the bull. Has a few scars to show for us. And here's Timmy, Judge Lawless, pushing our little bags on the way out of the airport. But you can see we're back in time a little bit. It's not quite like LaGuardia. And now we're in the Caucasus Range after the air flight with 3.5 hours. We're in the Caucasus Range, and you're in the mountains, in a valley. It's 90 degrees below, but there's just. And there's Tim and I, the first time we saw the Elbrus together, and it was kind of interesting because I had a problem on Aconcagua with pulmonary edema. Tim had some real problems in some of the equators in Ecuador he was doing, and he had some altitude sickness. So the two of us, whenever you see the mountain you're going to climb for the first time, it's kind of interesting because you know you're going to do it, you know you want to do it, and you just hope everything works out okay. So there's a little trepidation as you start to see where you're headed. And that's just him hanging out over the side of a... But it's beautiful. I mean, it's just, no matter where you go, part of this is just, the Caucasus Range is just an incredible range of mountains that not a lot of people know about. There's a lot of peaks that have not been climbed. And there's Lupa. I mentioned her earlier. She actually has climbed that peak 2 or 3 times, the one behind us. A very famous Russian climber, wonderful lady. I tried to teach her how to tango at 15,000 feet. I don't know how that worked or not.
Have you had to use oxygen at all?
No.
None.
Didn't use oxygen. We could have on Aconcagua, but they really don't start oxygen until about 25,000 feet. And this is interesting only because that's Frank, the dentist from Cleveland that I climb with. We're at a camp. The kids in Russia, all they want to do was learn English. I mean, they just hang around and learn English. And we had this little guidebook, and if you remember when you travel, you have guidebooks. It'll say, "How do you fix my engine?" And all these bogus things that you never really ever need.
You need when you're up a mountain. How do you fix my engine?
And we'd read it in Russian, and they'd say it to us in English, and it was just so neat. These kids just wanting to know English, and They're really, really just neat kids. And the only reason I took this, when kids get upset about not having things, here they are at a camp, we're playing ping pong. We don't have any paddles. I'm using a book. And look what the net is, just a bunch of books.
Yeah.
And that's, these kids, we taught them how to play doubles and run around the table, and they thought it was fantastic. So, we'll get into some climbing. We're acclimating. And when you acclimate on these big mountains, above 13,000 feet, as I said, you go about 1,000. You can climb 2,000 or 3,000 feet, but you always come back down. You always climb high and sleep low. So you'll climb wherever and then sleep low and then work your way up the mountain. This is just it's kind of bizarre. We all decided that they saw this waterfall. We all decided to get in and have a shower, which was kind of crazy. Now this is an interesting picture in that this is our guide. That's Luis Benz again. But the guy on the left, and I didn't know this when I was there, his name is Nikolai. Nikolai was one of the lead Russian climbers early on in the 80s and 90s, and I read a book, Anatoly Bokarev, this famous Russian climber, probably the strongest climber there ever was. That was his coach. And in talking to him, it was interesting. He would tell me something, you don't get it, and this kind of thing in broken English. But I didn't realize how famous he was till I got back here and then read books about him, and sort of relate now the stories that he told us. And then we're going to start finally doing some.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I'm going to start doing some. Slow down.
Oh yeah, they're so
Well, you'll see
great.
some more. I'll show you some. The interesting thing on this shot is we stayed, and the interesting thing about this whole climb was it's not like Aconcagua. We're not sleeping in tents, and it was kind of bizarre. Those are old Russian fuel tanks that we stayed in, and I'll show you a picture. It's a ski slope too. The kids were still skiing.
Wait a minute, you stayed in an old Russian fuel tank?
See those tanks
Yeah.
that are right there? They were converted into places to sleep. And in the next slide, I'll show you.
Yeah.
I don't know if Tim. Here we are inside a fuel tank at I think it's 14,000 feet, just acclimating and hanging around. And then we'd go out the next day, and we're not in charge of the colors. I don't know where the colors
Interesting
colors
combination.
came. Yeah, we didn't. And then this is sort of what mountaineering is. Then you go out and you get your pack on and you climb to maybe 15,000 feet, 16,000 feet during the day just to start getting yourself acclimated. And this is basically what we're doing. It's hot. It's a little bit of work. I mean, you're at least in the daytime talking to each other, and you get to meet the lead guy is a physician from Denver, and you meet people from all over. Timmy's actually the second one there in his little yellow-orange outfit. And there are the Caucasus Ranges in the background.
Define hot.
Pardon me?
Define hot.
Well, it was warm. I mean, with the sun, Calvin, it was, you could really get fried. It probably was, ambient temperature might have been in the 60s, but it was hot with the reflections of the sun off the mountain in the snow, so it could be pretty warm. Plus, you're working out. I mean,
Yeah.
we're all in shorts, so it's not really bad at all. Now, this is an interesting slide, and there's one on Aconcagua. That's a lenticular cloud bank that comes in over these big mountains. And I've been lucky on two mountains. I've been able to get two pictures. They're a little more dramatic in the Aconcagua picture. But when you see that, it's unstable air, and you're about to get a storm. Whenever you see a lenticular cloud formation, you know that somebody's getting battered. And that's up higher. That's about 18,000 feet. So you know somebody's getting clobbered, but it just comes so quickly.
Interesting.
So quickly that you got to go seek shelter somewhere. Fortunately, we were far enough away that we were still down on the peak. But I mean, you can start to see the wind comes up and picks up, and there's a few crevasse fields on Elbrus that we stayed away from. And then let's see, what do we get? We start packing our gear and going back down. And I can whip through a few of these. I'm not sure what you're going to get here.
So slow.
We're just hanging out. We were just hanging out. There's Luis and the Keishan boy, and Dawn and Frank and I just sort of taking a break.
This is quite a ways up on the mountain?
Yeah, we're about 16,000 feet. just taking a little break. Now this is where, when you normally would be staying in a tent or whatever, we're in this little shack, and there's 15 of us in this little house, which is sort of on the side of a. It's just sort of you wonder if it's going to stay there.
Somebody had to bring that stuff up there,
The
right?
Russians were good enough to do that. They actually had quite they had a big thing that burned down. I mean, so this is what they ended up doing. This is just getting our water. One thing on that, it's interesting. In the Soviet Union, you had to iodine all your water. None of the water was safe to drink, even in the big hotels. So you carried iodine, and that's what you do when you brush your teeth or whatever. You just get used to using treated water. Here we took water just right out of the streams and the melting glacier. And there's Tim, and there's where we're in. We're all piling into this. You get acquainted. Trying to find your gear at night when you're trying to go got to be an experience. But the interesting thing here, we had bad weather, and as that storm came in, we couldn't go. Now we only had one day that we could actually climb. Now, some of these people, because this is one of the 7 summits, were driven. Some of them were going to Antarctica, others were going to Everest. And it was like they were going to go the next day. They didn't care what. I mean, they were going no matter what. They didn't care if they could see or not. They were going to try it. So the first day we didn't go. So we sort of hung around. And some people played cards, and some of us. Luis faked a book. I mean, that's a book that my wife had read. So I said, "Hold that up, A Girl with a Pearl. You can make big points." And we wandered around and found some pictures. I guess that's supposed to be of Lenin. That's Dawn posing. And then they show you how really I've trained my fellow climbers. I want you to know that we had great oral hygiene on this peak. We're all sitting there brushing our teeth. But you never know. Now we're going to climb. And we're going to climb this peak I should have my pointer, but if you look in the center going up, it looks like a road almost. We're going to go right up to the rocks called Petrograph Rocks, which is up higher, and then we're going to traverse the height of. I should get the pointer, because the peak itself on the left-hand side, way in the back, there's a tiny little blip. That's actually the summit. So what we're going to do is we're going to climb at night. We're going to get up about 12:30, 1 o'clock. They had 2 different teams go. You climb all night in the dark, and about 6 or 7 in the morning the sun will come up, but you're going to traverse. You're not going to climb straight up because it's too steep, so you're going to traverse all across that peak and get into the col between the 2 peaks, and then there's another 800 feet we'll show you going up. So that's the plan, and that's what we're going to do. So now you're climbing all night. I don't have any pictures of nighttime because it's pitch black, and as I said, it's you in the mountain. You stopped about every 45 minutes to try and get water. And one of the things I want to emphasize on these climbs is they want you drinking 4 to 6 liters of water a day, because at altitude you have to hydrate because you lose so much moisture in just maintaining metabolism. Mm-hmm. And this is actually a picture of this first sunrise, the sun coming up. And it's so nice because it's cold. I mean, now on Aconcagua it could have been 70 below. Here it was maybe 10 or 15 below. It was a lot colder in the Adirondacks than it was here. But it's so nice after climbing all night to have that first sunrise and just to feel the heat of the sun. And
look at this.
This is an interesting shot in that if you look carefully, you can see something you really don't. I'm going to have to get up and show you. My wife says, "What are you showing that picture for?" Well, there's a reason. Can I sneak up?
Jump right up
I should go get my pointer.
Just go and do it.
I'll go get the pointer. Don't go.
This is a really high-class television show. We're interviewing dentist Bob Heins at 75 Court Street.
I want you to guess, Bob Heins. I want you to guess what this is. Can you figure out what that is? Here's the mountains.
Yeah.
This actually is the summit of Elbrus. The sun's coming up over here, so you actually have the summit shadow on sunrise. So you get a picture, in the sky. That's the shadow of the summit of the peak.
Like a hot air balloon.
Well, yeah, the whole thing, though. It's this whole thing right here. That's the summit of the peak. And I've seen one other slide somebody got on Everest with that. But it has to be the right condition and the right.
Wow.
It's not that steep, but it's ice, and you're crawling around. So this is daylight, and we're heading into the call, and we're on our way. You can see it's a little cool. These are two people from New Mexico. Isn't that pretty? Isn't that beautiful? I mean, it's just amazing. I mean, these high peaks are just fantastic. What a neat area. It's just beautiful. There's Ishaba, which is one of the famous peaks. They call it the Caucasus Matterhorn. It actually, if you get to the side view, it does look like the Matterhorn. It doesn't from that perspective, but that's the reason you do it. Look how beautiful it is. It's just you and nature. You become very insignificant. You realize when you're doing this. It's my ant theory. I mean, you become.
Yeah, that's true.
And here you are coming across the col, and we're heading up. Now, as I related before, there's a gentleman in the snow taking pictures, and I didn't realize that, but there's our crew. This gentleman was wanting to climb Everest, so he wanted to train, so we gave him all our packs. He carried all the stuff. I was happy.
Oh, that's good.
They let me because I was the oldest. They put me right here. I got to be the first one to summit, which was kind of neat. And when everybody, I think the next oldest was maybe 50, and then the rest were in their 30s, except for Lupa, who was. So these are just some pictures of us struggling. I'm about 200 feet from the summit, but see, we have our crampons on, and our little ice axe, and we're tied in, and it's just a special picture. She's a neat lady. And there we are on the summit, looking toward Chechnya, actually, which was another concern because the Chechen rebels were blowing up things as we went, and there was a problem with a bus in one of the cities we went through, and sort of scared my wife a little bit. And we'll go through this fairly quick. I'll show you.
Just absolute. These are shots that laymen don't see except from the window of an airplane.
Yeah, that's a little over 18,000 feet, 18.3. Yeah, when you're above the clouds, it's kind of interesting. And that's our whole crew on the summit. It was kind of fun. All piling, quite a group. Actually there were too many, but I mean the way things go now. And that's the picture that I showed you before that really makes it all worthwhile, especially when you can't summit one, and you don't summit all these, and you realize that it's based on the weather and a lot of other things, and we're fortunate to be with some of my best friends and one of the more famous guides now around the country. And there's a picture that Timmy and I took with our little county shield, which they had in the press.
Nice.
Yeah.
So
that made the Press Republic, and that was cool. We have a picture of the county seal and the two of us standing on the tallest peak in Europe.
That's a beautiful shot.
That was neat.
Did you claim it?
Yeah.
Did I? Yeah, I claimed it in the name of Clinton County. Yeah. I don't know if it worked or not. No, this is a Rotary banner that I took up. I had a lot of the Rotarians sign it and brought it back to them, which was kind of fun.
That's great.
And this, we decided to slide down, but the picture is not. That's not how steep it was. It's got to be tilted, but we finally said it was this. I said, "Can't we just slide down this thing? It would be what a riot." And finally, Nikolai or Louis said, "Okay, go ahead." Well, I tried, and I couldn't really get going fast enough. And that's when Nikolai came over and he says, "You don't get it. You don't get it. Get on your Gore-Tex. You slide." Oh. And I turned around and boom, you go flying down this mountain like a rocket. Oh. But then we get down and you had a nice little barbecue, and there's a little barbecue in a dacha, and it was quite an experience. There's just some of the crew that was there.
Look at the red faces. There was a lot of sunburn.
There's a lot of sunburn on that one. A few beers too after we were done, but it was a great adventure. And this is an interesting story in that. See what Timmy has in his mouth? They said it was tenderloin, and somebody said, "I've had beef all my life." It's not. It was horse. Everybody say, "Everybody have a horse. Raise your hand." Well, Wallace has the horse meat in his mouth, so he's proving that he's.
Horse's name.
Very good. And that's just Red Square. That's Red Square at night with a full moon as we were getting ready to fly out. And you think about history, and Timmy brought this up, just a few years ago, all the things that were targeted on that piece of property back in the 50s. I was there in 69, and it was a lot different. Now, there's discotheques, there's kids running around with English, there's a Mexican restaurant. It's a whole different scene in the Kremlin than it was then. But that basically is the end of the Obrist adventure. It was a great adventure. We met a lot of nice people, and the Russian people are just wonderful. The Russian people themselves are so friendly and so nice, and I hope that our two countries continue to get closer together, because the people are think the same way we do. They really do.
Isn't it amazing after all those years of derision? Well, we're going to shut the slides off and turn the lights on and chat for a few more minutes. Well, we did. We turned the lights on for a minute just because you didn't see it. We had to put some more slides in. That's what we did. This is one I saw on the wall in the beginning of our program.
This is Aconcagua, almost 23,000 feet. They call it the Stone Sentinel in Argentina. That's the highest peak outside of Asia. It's almost, as I say, almost 23,000 feet. This is the eastern slope, the eastern view. We're actually going to circumvent this whole mountain. You'll see the way we did it. We climbed the north face, but you'll see the whole peak. This is the Polish Glacier, which is a 60-degree glacial peak that some of the big boys climb. We stayed away from that, but you can see it's high desert, and we'll start again. I just started this with a picture. We'll go back now and land in Mendoza, Argentina, in the eastern. It's actually in the western section of Argentina. And we'll talk about wine for 2 seconds, but any red wine you get from Argentina is going to come from Mendoza. Great vineyards. Now the French and California people are going down there to start producing wine. I don't know if I'm in focus.
Yeah, give it a shot.
That's Dawn and Frank, and we're on our way in a little bus, and we're getting ready to head for our first little camp before we climb. The interesting thing about this is part of where they filmed Brad Pitt's 7 Years in Tibet.
Oh,
they filmed a lot of it in Argentina. This bridge actually there's a picture of it to look like a Tibetan bridge. The movie people came in and got it all spruced up, and it's kind of interesting to see it now and to see the pictures they had. This is actually a ski slope. This is one of the ski slopes in Argentina. There's a ski lift that goes up here, and you can ski down. This is it's high desert. It's about 10,000 feet. And this is glacial runoff, and you see this in any of the glacial peaks, whether you're in Nepal or Argentina or Rainier. It's all this grayish water coming down from glaciers melting, and this is again high desert. It's hot. You want to know how hot it is here, Calvin? It's about 103 to 104. So in this adventure, we're going to go from 104 to about 60 to 70 below in a course of 3.5 weeks. Oh, boy. This is one of our guides. This is BJ. BJ's a nice guy, but he almost got me killed. He's a nice kid. He's out of Alaska with a guide service, but he had never summited Aconcagua. We didn't know that at the time. Another guide that was with us had, but BJ hadn't, which we found out later. And this is our mule support. The mules carry your packs for the first 2 days, and mules take off, and you follow the mule trains. And this is just some of the high desert color. This is just the mules at night, and that's another story. But they can't. They have these muleteers that come around and to stop the mules. Well, the mules will get to a certain spot, then they don't want to be corralled, and they literally have a rodeo. They have to wrestle them and they rope them until they cover their heads. These things are wild. So we had our own little show. Then you're just sleeping out in the stars. Is that in focus, Cal?
Not really. That's better.
We're just sleeping out in the woods. And one interesting story here: we had to cross the Vacas River, and every year down there. Somebody drowns in this river. Because if you don't get to 18,000 feet, you got to come back this way. The other way, there's a bridge. And I don't know if you can make it out, but there's a little rope that goes across here. Well, when the mules aren't there, that's how you have to cross. And when there's a lot of glacial melt, this is really roaring. And if you don't hold on to this, you can get swept down the river, and somebody every year gets hammered in the river. And then this is just high desert hiking. And then I'm going to go through these fairly quickly. But remember I talked about insignificant. There's just miles. You see nobody. You see nothing. There are some wanakos, which are these like llamas we saw. No airplanes overhead. You are just isolated. For miles and miles. It's beautiful, but it's you and the land. And if you realize if something really bad happened, you'd have a problem. And this is Aconcagua again. Again, that's just another. Some of these we can go through. That's just hamming it up. And that's it. That's in the evening. That's in the evening. But the first time you saw the mountain, I hadn't realized how big it was. And when you saw it for the first time, you realized it was going to be a challenge. And we're just out hanging out. At night, it's hot. And now we're going to actually go up this dry river bank. We have a 30-mile climb to get to where we want to go. And again, we're going through the glacial runoffs. And this is kind of funny because this water is really cold, and I didn't have tennis shoes or anything, so I didn't want to get my boots wet. So we ended up just taking our shoes off, and it's rocky and cold. And Don, we finally said to heck with it. We just jumped across it. We couldn't take it anymore. And we're slowly getting into the mountains. But isn't that pretty? It's just beautiful. You get the high mountains and the snows, and this is our first camp at about 12:05. And this is what we're going to talk about: siege climbing. When you climb a big mountain like this one, where you're in tents and you're carrying loads, you're going to stay at 12, and our next camp is going to be up here at 14.5. So there's 2,000 feet. So what you're going to do is you're going to spend the night. Then you're going to get up in the morning and you're going to grab your gear, 50 pounds or so. We each had about 50 pounds. Carry it to here, store it there, come back down, sleep, and the next day you carry the rest of your gear with about another 50 pounds up to the second camp. So you actually climb these peaks about 2 times. Carrying 50-pound loads. And that's why I say you want to stay in shape, because it can be a little bit of a challenge. Now it's a trail, and there's no snow because it's still hot. It's in the summer. It's February, but remember we're in Argentina, so that it's reversed. We're going to start. You're going to see this a lot because this is where we turned the corner and came up, and you'll see this through this whole valley. This is our second camp. This is where the ridge I showed you before. This is where we are looking down on where we were the night before. And then we just continue onward. This shows us halfway through. You get up to where you're going to go and you just sort of collapse. It's hot, and then you go back down and spend the night and come back up again. And this is our second camp at 14.5. Somebody had some prayer flags. It would snow during the night, but it would melt during the day. So you can see it's cold. We're wearing parkas, so it's probably 15 or 20 at night. And this is my famous dental picture. This is, believe it or not, that's me after This gentleman had a problem and lost his tooth, or he was having a problem with a crown. And I took a Swiss Army knife and took the corkscrew part of it and was able to get the crown off out of his mouth, and we found some temporary cement from somewhere and cemented it back in his mouth. And I just said, bite down. He didn't know he had 3 dentists with him. Well, he actually did, but it was fortunate. We were able to get it back in his mouth, and as far as I know, when the climb ended, it was still there. So that's my high mountain.
I hope there wasn't toxic cement.
No. We somebody had some temporary. We diluted it with iodine and water, and we were all set. But that was my high dentistry period.
Okay.
And this actually is Aconcagua, the peak, believe it or not, from the back side. But we're at 14, that's 23. We're using the high quite a magnification. It looks a lot closer than it is, believe me. Then this is just, yeah, these are where the glaciers meet the high desert. You get what they call penitentes, and I'll show you in the next slide, I think. Well, it's not here, but it'll be coming up. During the night, one of these fell off, and you heard this horrific boom, and this whole glacial sheet just fell into the valley. You think of these skiers that come out in the Adirondacks and ski. These dive skiing people would love that part of the country. But see what happens. You get in certain parts of the world. There aren't many places. And in certain times of the year, you have to weed your way through these this glacier that is slowly melting.
It's an incredible picture.
The
I've never seen anything like that in my life.
See how thin they are. It's Dawn doing it. Yeah, you don't see that very often. There's just a few places in the world that you see that.
It's a vertical ice.
Right,
To the left.
and they call it penitentes. It's supposed to. I think it's monks in repose is the way that translates in Spanish. And they're just fields of them. Now we're at 16,000 feet, and we're actually it's early. I'm not sure. This is frozen. It hasn't. That's a water, but it's frozen. Later in the day, it'll thaw out, but you can see it's still rock. This is just a big rock mess. We're getting higher. And now we're in the Andes at 16,000 feet, and I can go through these a little quicker, but this gives you an idea of what it's like in a tent. And there's 3 of us in there, we're piled in, so you get to know each other very. You're 3 weeks with no hot water. No hot water. We throw baby powder on ourselves. Just you get in Heins so we all had the same smell, sort of. And that's our 16,000 foot camp. We're going to 18, and actually now we're a little higher, so some of the snow is staying on the ground. But we're still not really dressed in heavy gear. I mean, it's still hot. You can really get sunburned, and it's. Everyone said, "Well, it doesn't look very steep." Well, it is. You're doing switchbacks all the time, but this shows you the work. I mean, there's 50 to 60 pounds you're carrying, just you struggling along, and you have to do it twice, once in one day, then you go back and sleep and come back and do it again. So it's work. It gets your attention, especially when you get higher. The higher up you go, the more work it is. And then now we're at 18. Just looking out, same views, so to speak. This is one of our guides getting water. This is the guide, Luis. That actually, this isn't Luis. I can't think of which one this is for the moment. But getting water from a glacier. And this is just a camp at 18,000, and we're going to stay there for 2 days, we think, and go to 20. Well, as it turns out, we'll get to 20. That's still 18. It shows you how you eat. I mean, we're in a cook tent. They're cooking food. Actually, we ate pretty well. It was a taco, sort of a burrito kind of thing. The only problem was you're in this tent, and if you're not very supple, they have to sit like that for very long. That was killing me. I mean, you're all piled in together. And we're getting higher, so we're starting to get more gear on, protecting ourselves from the wind. It still looks wonderful out. And again, this is dawn at another angle going up. And now we're at 20. This is 20,000 feet looking out over the Andes. It's pretty neat.
Beautiful.
Pretty neat. And we come back down, and we were talking about the lenticular cloud, and this happens within maybe 15 minutes. This starts, and then you get this, and that's on the summit, and then it gets like this, and then all heck broke loose. I mean, it was just crazy, and Ed Palin told me before I went there that you'd see some of the worst storms in the world if it happened, and sure enough, we got hammered at 18,000 feet. The wind's blowing. This is a pharmacist from New Jersey, John Rocky. Now, we're pretty stupid. We didn't realize that this is all going to fill with snow. All our boots are frozen. Everything gets frozen in this thing. But it just happens. Now, here we are. We're going to be in this tent for 24 hours. Nobody's going anywhere. Everything's fine at the beginning. And we're all, you can see we're in our tent with our parkas. And then it gets colder. And and then it gets to be not so much fun after a while. And pretty soon it's like this. And we're all just, this is 24 hours in the tent with the wind blowing 80 miles an hour. And you can't go outside. And you're doing whatever. It's a pretty wild experience. People... we had some tents blow away.
Oh, you did?
Yeah. People, if you don't want to be exposed in this environment, really, if you can avoid it, and you just realize you got this thin barrier of a tent, and you'd be in a little bit of trouble, even with the gear we had on. But anyway, we get out the next day, and we pack up, and we head to 20,000 feet, and now we're at high camp. We're going to summit the next day, but the weather turned bad again, so we were stuck here for another day. And that's the... Pardon me?
A couple of questions.
Sure.
Obviously, for 24 hours there, you didn't know you were going to be 24 hours.
Right.
It could have been 48 hours. Were you able to eat? How'd you eat?
The problem was we didn't eat very much, and that's a good point. I was looking at my notes. We didn't eat for about... I had a couple of candy bars maybe for 14 hours. We didn't drink as much as we should have. And this is where we get in trouble later on. To drink now, you have to melt the snow. And where we ran into a problem at this altitude was some of the stoves didn't work. We couldn't get the stoves to work, so we couldn't melt the snow. Now, we should have been smart enough to realize we went to summit. We're at 21. We got to go to almost 23. I had a liter of water. Well, you don't do that in a candy bar. Well, that was stupid. Yeah, it really was pretty dumb on my part. We never should have gone. But as I say, we got into some problems, and one of the same poor guy that we put the crown on had the wrong kind of gloves on, and within 10 minutes he had frostbite of his hands. So he was forced to go back down, and two of them went down with the other guide. So now we're on a mountain. I've certainly never been on before. The guide had never summited before, and we're going to summit. And it just one thing led to another. And at that altitude and in those conditions, you should be smart enough to know that you can be in trouble. And I probably was and just wasn't thinking.
Wow.
Because it gets worse here in a minute. That's 20. And this just shows you just some of the land. It's beautiful. I mean, it's just beautiful. There's something wrong with the slide, but it's just beautiful country. And you see no one, Gordy. I mean, there is nobody, no animals, no anything. And it's really an isolated area. And we're going to. This is sunset. We're just out looking over the.
Just beautiful picture.
That's my Merlin. I look like Merlin the magician. But now we're in. I don't have my boots on, but I got 5 layers of gear on there. I mean, it's cold. And the next day there's our camp. We're gonna start to hit the summit. So we get up at 6 in the morning. Wow, this is one more pose. But we're gonna go this way, and then I'll show you another. I think I have another slide. What we're gonna do. And again, it doesn't look bad because the snow's all melted. It snows at night and melts during the day. But it is steep. I mean, here's our little tent, and you can see when the wind's blowing and it comes in. You're in an exposed area.
Oh, sure.
You can get clobbered. And we're gonna. Let me see what's next here. Well, this jumps way ahead. This is at 22. This is at 22,000 feet, and we're going to go in what they call a canaletta, which is a lot of loose rock for 1,000 feet. To get us over the summit crest of the north summit to the south summit, which is about 30 meters higher. And I'm putting crampons on. Well, I put crampons on in the Adirondacks, in 5 minutes. But when you're at 22,000 feet, just getting the crampons out of your pack, putting them on, it's just a whole different ballgame. And what you don't realize is how slow you hike. We'd hike going up the cantal at probably maybe a step every 6 breaths. So you'd go, and you'd take a step, and you'd go and you'd step again, and you were. The crazy thing about this was each one of these rocks was slippery, so you could stand on a rock and you could go 3 meters and the rock would slide down 2 meters. So you're 1 meter from where you started, and you're at altitude, and it's starting to wear and tear. And what we were doing, we were traversing this, and we were coming up the backside of this, and I was coughing. I'd been coughing for a while, ever since maybe 16,000 feet. And the cough got worse, and I wasn't hydrated. And I got to probably my watch was 22.4, and I started spitting up. Pulmonary edema is interesting. You get weak. I was one of the stronger ones going to 20,000 feet. I certainly wasn't one of the stronger ones at this point. There are only 5 of us now trying to summit. BJ goes ahead, so our guide went ahead to summit, left us, and this whole thing then turned into a nightmare. I was spitting up lung tissue. I knew I had to get down. The scary thing is when you come into this, you don't know. You need oxygen. Well, we didn't have oxygen, so you have to tell yourself, I got to get down. I'm 400 feet from the summit. I'm on the north summit.
Oh, golly.
Almost on the south summit, and realized that if I didn't get down, I was going to die, literally. And it takes you about 3 seconds to realize what is important in your life. I mean, your wife and your kids. And turned around, and the pharmacist from New Jersey said, Bob, you got to get down now. And just as I said that, the storm comes in. I mean, and suddenly you can't see 50 feet ahead of you. Now I got pulmonary edema starting. You can feel it in your chest. It's a strange phenomenon. We're by ourselves. I have no water, and we're at 22,461 feet. And it was an interesting experience. I kept saying, I'm not going to die in a mountain nobody can pronounce. And I said that over and over. And we started back down. It was John and myself, and we found Dawn. She was in a cave trying to stay out of the wind. And made our way back down about 600 feet and got behind a rock. And BJ, the guide, finally, I don't know how, you don't know in that time frame how long time really, and you really are probably not thinking as well. But they actually thought we were dead. They thought we had gone down the Grand Arroyo, which would have been an 8,000-foot scree slope and would have been just blown away. But it was a pretty emotional experience for everybody. And you really realize, as I said, what's important and how you better know what you're doing on these mountains, because they can come back and hammer you.
So you stayed behind the thing, then what?
Well, we stayed behind the thing, worked our way back to camp. And it's interesting because when I follow, it's a joke. When I'm in the Adirondacks, I follow Phil Carell and these guys. I really don't pay attention as to where I'm going. But here, for some reason, I knew where we had to turn, and realized if we hadn't turned, we would have been down in the middle of nowhere. And saw the one rock we had to turn, and we stayed there. And eventually the guide came back, worked our way back down to camp at 20,000 feet. And all I remember is falling asleep. I fell asleep as a first. That's another thing in high mountaineering. You don't sleep very well. Nobody sleeps. You might get 2 or 3 hours sleep at night, which adds to this whole tension bit. But that night I slept all night. I remember waking up and never ate. Again, we hadn't eaten. It was another 12 hours we didn't eat. And it was a pretty interesting experience.
What's the healing process like for the lungs?
It takes a while. It takes a while. I lost 18 pounds. There's a picture you're going to see in a minute that I kid Brian Lapierre about, and I'll tell you that story when we get to it. It took a long time. In fact, if I talk for a long time, you can hear it. I mean, I'm fine, and I've been high, and I'll go high again, but at that point it was, it took a while. Yeah. It took a while. And here we are going down. Now, you think you're through the worst of it, but you're really not, because to go down, we have to put 80 pounds on our back to carry everything down, because you're not going to siege going down. So you start down, they literally load you like a pack mule, and the pack sort of guides where you're going. And you start down these scree slopes. and you end up, your feet get hammered. We're now headed down to Plaza de Mules, which is the main route in, and it's way down here. You can see these little tents. We're gonna end up getting down there, and you're going down these ski slopes, and your toes are just all beat up. I mean, you get blisters all over. Everything's taped. It's a mess. And this next slide is an interesting. There I am. I lost 18 pounds. Somebody said they had a beer, and I said, that was the best tasting beer ever. Hands are all taped up, but my mother looked at that and said, my God, you look like your father. I was really beat up. But that's the, I told Brian when we were campaigning, I said, Brian, you can take that slide, put it as a poster, and say, who in his right mind would ever vote for a guy like that? But
Caught you with your pants half down, too.
for some reason, my outer layer fell down. I don't know why. But that was something else. And that pretty much does it. I mean, it goes on, but that pretty much tells me the story. So as it turns out, Gordy, I got right to there. I got to that little spot right there on that crazy mountain, and to this day, I wonder if I should go back and try it again, but I think I've done my South American.
But every day you climb, there's a new story to tell.
It certainly is. I mean, there's a new story, a new adventure. You meet amazing people, and as I say, whether it's the Adirondacks, and go out. I tell people here, go out and enjoy these peaks. If it's Mount Joe, if it's going to Marcy Dam, because it's beautiful country.
Go do it. Okay, let's stop a minute and turn the lights on.
You're in trouble. You wish you did.
Calvin just said before we started the camera, golly, I was on my edge of my seat. I couldn't wait to find out if you made it out alive.
Well, there was a time there, Calvin, when none of us were sure. But you look back on it now, and it is. You realize two things. One, you don't take pictures. You forget to take pictures of yourself in a blizzard when you're having a problem. But
yeah, this I think it's a very important. We made some great points today and learned a great deal. First thing I learned was stay on the mountainside of the Yak.
That's right.
The next thing is, this is, I love adventure, but this is not something you even think about lightly unless you're willing to make one heck of a commitment. Number one, you know you're going to torture your body. This isn't like a gentleman's moose hunt or a caribou hunt in Colorado. This is the real thing. And if we haven't made that point, I wish our people watching this program would think about it a little bit, because you did. You were on the brink a couple of times there.
Jim Whittaker, the first American to climb Everest, made the comment about high mountaineering. It's like hitting yourself in the head with an ice axe. You don't enjoy it till you stop. And it's a little bit like that. But it's hard to explain the challenge that you go through and the emotion that you have when you do summit. It's really really pretty incredible.
People say, why? Why do people do the Ironman? Why do people do the triathlon, some of the crazy other races that they put together? Why do people do things? Well, because I think it's in our nature to want to stand on the edge of the precipice and see if we can keep from falling off.
And to see how well you can do. And it's a challenge, and you see what you're made of. And but at the same time, the bonds that you form with these people, I mean, the three of us that were in trouble on that mountain that were smart enough to know what we had to do and know how to get down, those are lifelong friends you'll always have. And when you go through a thing like that, it really is a bond, and we've had some great times.
And your wife all this time was cozy and warm somewhere, right?
Evelyn was cozy and warm, but the sad thing, and I'll tell one quick story, one of the boys that one of my dental instructors, my dentist friends from Buffalo, who's climbed all over the world, the same time I was there, was in Argentina climbing and had a coronary at 18,000 feet and died, and they called Evelyn while I was there thinking I was with them, which completely blew her mind. That was another whole story. But she's accepted the fact that we're now with a reputable guide service. That's the first thing I learned. And I'm not going to go above 20,000 feet again. I think that I've
been there, done that.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't need to, but you'll still have fun
Oh, yeah.
walking and hiking and climbing. And as we wrap up this program, I do want to let people know again that there's plenty to see and do right in this Adirondack region. And you can be challenged right to that same brink that you were in Argentina,
you sure can.
right here in the Adirondack.
It's just a wonderful place to live, Gordy, and as I say, it's a four-seasonal climb, and it's beautiful out there. You can have the same adventure in the Adirondacks. If you want to climb in the winter when it's freezing cold, you can do that. If you want to go in the summer, you take your kids. And I think it's important to let kids find out what it is in the outdoors and do it as a family, because it's a family. It can be a family adventure in the Adirondacks.
Now, that's a good place to end. Thanks again to Bob Heins, local dentist, who invited us in here after business hours to take a look around his place, a charming old building that dates back to 1810, and some great slides from all over the world. Again, Robert, thanks a lot. Best of everything, and you're going again in August of 2002.
We're gonna do Kilimanjaro in August. Tim and I are gonna do that. That should be fun. That should be an interesting climb. And then I'm gonna do some volcanoes in Mexico in November, and then back to Nepal in 2003.
And don't forget the next time with a Swiss Army knife to put in some
That's
better
it.
glue,
Okay.
right?
We could try that here, Gordy, but
No, thank you. I hope you've enjoyed this half as much as we have, and we're in for more adventures somewhere, goodness knows where. As I always end the program by saying, who knows where we're going to be next time.